Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever heard that phrase, canary in the coal mine?
Oh, yeah. It's a classic.
Such a powerful image, right?
Hmm.
Miners um, taking this tiny sensitive bird down with them.
Because its reaction, its distress, would warn them about dangerous gases, the ones you can't smell, way before the humans felt it. A living alarm system.
Exactly. And it wasn't just, a story. They actually did this for decades with canaries detecting carbon monoxide.
Right, the metaphor really stuck. It captures that idea so well, how the most sensitive individuals can signal toxicity in an environment first.
And that's where this gets super relevant to, well, to our work lives.
Hmm.
That same idea applies directly to our workplaces. So this deep dive, it's all about understanding neurodiversity
You know, the natural variation in how our brains work.
and exploring this really powerful idea from our source material today. That people whose brains are wired differently, often neurodivergent people, they can function like those canaries in our organizations.
Mm. So if a workplace is becoming, say, unfair or just dysfunctional, maybe even toxic, well, individuals who process sensory stuff more intensely, or maybe they're really wired to notice patterns or feel injustice deeply, they're often the first ones to feel the negative impact.
So ignoring their struggle, their experience.
Is like ignoring the canary gasping for air. You're missing the warning sign.
Which brings us right to the heart of our deep dive today. We're digging into a really fascinating book called The Canary Code, A Guide to Neurodiversity, Dignity, and Intersectional Belonging at Work by Ludmila Praslova.
And our mission, really, is to get into the core arguments of this book together. We'll explore why listening to these workplace canaries is so vital
We'll challenge some maybe outdated assumptions about work, about talent.
and hopefully uncover some concrete principles for building workplaces where everyone doesn't just like fit in, but actually belongs, can truly thrive.
Think of this as maybe a shortcut to understanding a pretty profound shift in how we can look at inclusion, performance, well-being,
Yeah,
all of it at work. We're going to explore this with you, pulling out the most important bits of insight.
sounds good.
So let's start right there. The central metaphor, the canary in the workplace. We know the history is real. Miners used them because their breathing was just so sensitive to toxins.
Right, and the book draws a direct line from that to the modern organization. Neurodivergent individuals, maybe with different sensory processing or that high awareness of inconsistencies, unfairness, they often feel the stress first. Burnout, exclusion. It hits them when the system starts breaking down.
There's even a group mentioned, Autistic Doctors International.
Yeah, they actually adopted the canary as their symbol. Their thinking is, look, if a workplace is manageable for us, it's probably okay for most people.
But if they're struggling,
It's a big red flag, a sign of wider problems brewing.
and the costs of just ignoring those signals, huge. Stress, burnout, people leaving in droves.
Definitely. The book explicitly connects toxic work cultures as a major reason behind things like the Great Resignation.
It's not just losing talent either, is it?
No, you risk damage to your reputation. You miss opportunities for innovation because you're missing those perspectives. And the crucial reframing here is that this sensitivity, it's not a weakness, it's not a flaw.
It's a different processing.
Exactly. It's processing experience, processing the environment more fully, more intensely, just like the canaries process the air differently.
And often, it's not just about noticing problems, right? Neurodivergent people might be more likely to actually speak up.
That's a key point. The source notes links between ADHD and a heightened sensitivity to injustice. Autistic people are often really attuned to justice, to truth-telling.
The book gives examples like Aaron Brockovich, dyslexic, right?
Right.
Fighting environmental pollution.
Yeah, or Greta Thunberg, an autistic activist raising the alarm on climate change. Simone Biles talking about ADHD stigma, exposing abuse.
There's also that story about Evie Adam.
Right, the young neurodivergent professional.
Hmm.
She tried to warn about inadequate COVID protocols in a care facility, faced backlash for speaking up.
But was ultimately proven right when outbreaks happened after she left.
These are people detecting systemic flaws. They're trying to sound an alarm that the organization really, really needed to hear.
So when companies exclude these canaries or silence them or push them out,
They're not just failing individuals, they're literally disabling their own early warning system, leaving themselves wide open to problems that could have been caught way earlier.
okay. So that really sets the stage. Which brings us to, well, understanding the basics. What is neurodiversity? And how does it challenge some maybe ingrained ways of thinking about normal at work?
Good question. The book lays out some key concepts, trying to use community-defined terms where possible. So neurodiversity itself, that's just the biological fact. Human brains vary infinitely across our lives.
For biodiversity in nature.
Just a variety. Exactly. It's just a reality. Then building on that, you have the neurodiversity paradigm.
Okay, what's the paradigm part?
That's the perspective shift. It views neurodiversity not as a medical issue, something needing fixing, but as a natural, essential form of human difference. There's no single right or correct way for a brain to be.
Got it. So from there.
We get terms like neurodivergent. That describes someone whose neurodevelopment just differs from what society currently considers typical.
And neurotypical.
That's for people who generally fall within that culturally defined typical range. And then neurominority group refers to a population who share some kind of innate neurodivergence and, importantly, face prejudice or disadvantage because of it in society.
The book also talks about language, doesn't it? The language of enrichment.
Yes, that's a powerful idea. Contrasting deficit language like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder with terms from, say, Te Reo Hapai in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Like Aroatini for ADHD.
Meaning attention goes to many things. Or for autism, Takiotanga in his or her own time and space. Or Kura Urapare, treasure in around your head.
Wow. That's a totally different framing, seeing difference as potentially valuable, not just a disorder.
Exactly, and that leads right into critiquing this whole normal versus pathological way of thinking that's been dominant for so long.
The book uses the term neuronormative expectations.
Yeah, those are the sort of unspoken rules, the assumed ways of behaving, communicating, thinking that are considered normal by the dominant culture. And related to that is neurotypical privilege.
Privilege meaning?
Meaning the ability to meet those neuronormative expectations without it costing you dearly, without suffering undue physical or emotional strain just to fit in.
The book had some personal stories about that, didn't it? Like trying to cope with loud parties or noisy offices, bright lights, strong smells.
Right. The sheer effort and the toll it takes trying to conform to sensory environments that might be fine for some, but actively painful or overwhelming for others. And the flip side is, if you don't conform or can't,
you risk being excluded, losing out on opportunities, access to, power within the organization.
It's a real cost. And the book even challenges the research itself, the pathology focus. There's this striking example.
The ethics study.
Yes, where autistic participants showed consistent ethical behavior doing the right thing, whether watched or not, and that was somehow interpreted as a dysfunction of reputational concern.
While the neurotypical group, whose ethics depended on context, more ethical when watched, less so when not that, was labeled healthy.
It completely flips the narrative. It suggests something the book calls transparent trustworthiness might be more characteristic of some autistic people.
Which makes you question that whole flow or flow thing, too.
Totally. Why is intense focus, hyperfocus, seen as a symptom when it's associated with ADHD?
But actively desired, even trained for, as flow state, when it's not labeled.
Right. Or why do companies pay for honesty training but might hesitate to hire someone who is demonstrably, transparently trustworthy, perhaps an autistic candidate?
Seems like a disconnect.
Huge disconnect. And despite, the growing business case, the book mentions J.P. Morgan's autism hiring program finding higher productivity, the Israeli Army's unit for autistic analysts, links between dyslexia and entrepreneurship, ADHD, and creative thinking.
Despite all that,
stigma persists. Stereotypes are still deeply rooted. That statistic about UK managers' prejudice or US hiring agents using slurs, it shows how far we still have to go.
The book does briefly touch on the history, too, grounding the movement.
Yeah, acknowledging pioneers. Mike Oliver and the social model of disability focus on fixing the disabling environment, not the person.
The autistic rights movement in the 90s. Jim Sinclair, identity first language.
Judy Singer coining neurodiversity. Harvey Bloom popularizing it. Cassian Asasumisu coining neurodivergent, Nick Walker with neurominority, Damian Milton's work on double empathy.
It helps to see where these ideas came from.
For sure, and acknowledging it's a movement with ongoing debates needing nuance. But the book quickly pivots to, okay, what do we do now? How do we build better systems?
And that seems to be where holistic inclusion comes in. What's the core idea there?
The core idea is simply that we're whole people. Mind, body, emotions, relationships, it's all connected. Neurodiversity isn't just about how we think.
It includes physical experiences, too.
Absolutely. Things like dyspraxia, Tourette syndrome, intense sensory sensitivities, they're part of the neurodiversity spectrum. They involve our physical and emotional experiences.
So real belonging means supporting the whole person.
That's the argument. If any part of you feels excluded or unsafe, your body doesn't feel physically or sensorially safe, your emotions are judged or dismissed, your communication style isn't accepted, you can't truly belong, no matter what inclusive mission statement is on the wall.
The book uses some powerful stories here. Mary McConnor.
Yeah, highly qualified, multiply marginalized, deaf hard of hearing, dyslexic, black woman, immense talent, but faced exclusion when she needed support for her intersecting needs. Organizations weren't set up to include her as a whole person.
And Jessica Johns, the analyst.
Brilliant analyst whose performance tanked simply because of the sensory environment of the open office. The lights, the noise, the glare, feeling exposed.
The physical and emotional suffering was real.
Profoundly real. It led to her autism diagnosis, but she only recovered and thrived with holistic support, crucially including remote work options that fit her sensory needs.
Then there was Jerry Gidner with Tourette syndrome.
Successful professional, still facing daily condescension, hostility sometimes, because of the physical pictics associated with Tourette's. His story really highlights how inclusion has to genuinely embrace physical difference, not just tolerate intellectual diversity.
These stories really drive home how typical inclusion efforts can miss the mark, right?
Definitely. They might focus on one aspect or offer these minimal sort of piecemeal accommodations, but they fail to see and support the interconnected needs of the whole complex human being.
Okay, so if that's the problem, how do we build workplaces that support the whole person systemically?
Right. The book lays out what it calls the 4 pillars of holistic neuroinclusion. These are the fundamental areas organizations need to address.
I know, right?
Social neuroinclusion. And this is way more than just, inviting everyone to the office party.
Which can be hell for some people.
Exactly. It recognizes that social needs and styles vary wildly. Some people thrive in big groups, others need quiet, focused time, or prefer fewer, deeper interactions.
So it means things like letting people opt out of social stuff without penalty.
Yes. And valuing different communication styles, written, verbal, direct, indirect. Crucially, emphasizing transparency over relying on everyone just reading the room or picking up on subtle, unspoken cues.
It's about accepting that someone quietly doing amazing work is as valuable as the person who's great at networking.
Precisely. The book mentions Twilio banning culture fit. That's a move away from those rigid social expectations. And training for neurotypical colleagues can also be key, helping them interact respectfully with different styles.
Okay, pillar 2.
Cognitive neuroinclusion. This is about genuinely valuing diverse ways of thinking, processing information, solving problems. It's where innovation often comes from.
So hiring for culture add, not just clones.
Exactly. Bringing in people who think differently and then supporting that difference in how work actually gets done. Flexible schedules to match different productivity peaks, flexible environments for deep work versus collaboration.
And being careful that one dominant thinking style doesn't take over, especially in leadership.
Critical point. Making sure different approaches are actually heard and considered.
Pillar 3.
Emotional neuroinclusion. This acknowledges that humans differ in how intensely they feel emotions and how they express them.
So creating space for authentic emotions, as long as they're not harmful, obviously.
Right. Normalizing a wider range of emotional expression. Avoiding biased judgments in hiring or promotions based on things like flat effect or being too enthusiastic if those are just someone's natural way of being.
Could even mean practical things like quiet rooms or private spaces for processing.
Potentially, but even more fundamentally, it's about the organization taking responsibility not to inflict emotional harm through things like chronic overwork, job insecurity, discrimination.
Aligning with things like the Surgeon General's framework on well-being.
Exactly. Ensuring basic social and economic safety is foundational to emotional inclusion.
Okay, and the 4th pillar.
Physical and sensory neuroinclusion. And this goes way beyond just meeting minimum ADA accessibility standards.
It's more systemic.
Yes. A systemic approach to non-discrimination in the physical environment. Basic accessibility is the floor, not the ceiling. The book really hammers the need to design for diverse sensory needs.
Lighting, noise, temperature, smells.
These aren't just preferences for many people. They can be genuinely disabling. They can cause physical illness, severe distraction, intense discomfort. So flexible work locations, adjustable lighting, quiet zones, scent-free policies, remote work, these become crucial.
And that connects back to the psychological curb cut effect, right?
Perfect connection. Just like physical curb cuts for wheelchairs ended up benefiting parents with strollers, cyclists, delivery people. Designing the sensory environment for the most sensitive often removes barriers and improves the experience for everyone.
A quiet zone isn't just for someone with diagnosed sensory issues. Anyone might need it sometimes.
Precisely. It makes the environment better overall.
So those are the 4 pillars. But the book goes even deeper, doesn't it, into why this stuff matters for genuine belonging.
It does. This is where we get into belonging on a deeper level, embodied inclusion. The argument is that our sense of belonging isn't just cognitive. It's not just about hearing the right words or reading the diversity statement.
That felt faster, deeper.
Much faster. The book talks about different processing speeds. Symbolic, language-based processing is relatively slow, conscious. Then there's connectionist intuition, pattern recognition, which is faster. Emotional processing is faster still. And the fastest is embodied processing, our physical gut reactions, goosebumps, muscle tension.
So if the words say inclusion,
But the physical environment feels overwhelming or unsafe, that's embodied. Or the social interactions feel confusing and unpredictable, connectionist. Or you have to constantly mask your emotions.
so faster systems pick up the mismatch.
Exactly. They detect the mixed signals, the dissonance, and that undermines any feeling of true belonging, no matter how nice the words are. Your body and intuition know you don't really fit, even if your conscious mind is trying to believe the corporate messaging.
Like loud, pulsing music in the lobby instantly signaling this place isn't for me, to someone with sensory sensitivities, overriding any welcome sign.
Perfect example. True belonging, the book argues, requires aligning all the signals an organization sends, creating environments people can sense with their entire being are genuinely welcoming, safe, and value them for who they are.
Okay. Wow. So we see why listening to the Canaries is vital, what holistic inclusion looks like across those pillars, and why this embodied sense of belonging is the goal.
Right.
So how? How do we actually build these systems?
Right. That's where the Canary Code principles come in. These are principles for building radically inclusive systems. And it starts by critiquing that common kind of piecemeal approach.
Sequential inclusion. Like we'll deal with gender this year, race next year, maybe disability someday.
Exactly. Which always leaves people at the intersections, people facing multiple forms of exclusion waiting forever. Radical inclusion flips that. It says, design your systems from the margins. Start with the needs of the most excluded, the most sensitive.
Because if you meet their needs,
You inherently create systems that work better for everyone. It's that curb cut effect again, but applied systemically.
the book used that classroom example, Karen Blatcher's class.
Yes, brilliant example. Elementary teacher. She started teaching all of her neurotypical students using methods typically recommended for autistic students, super clear communication, flexible expectations, supporting self-advocacy.
And what happened?
The neurotypical kids didn't just cope, they thrived, exceeded expectations. It showed that things often labeled special needs are actually just fundamental human needs for clarity, flexibility, respect. Needs that neurodivergent people might just feel more acutely or express differently. Designing for them lifted everyone up.
So what are these core Canary Code principles for building these systems?
There are 6 main ones outlined. First is participation.
Meaning
Genuinely involving employees, especially those from marginalized groups, in actually designing and improving the systems that affect their work. It's not about benevolent inclusion where someone else decides what's good for you.
it's nothing about us without us.
Yeah. Exactly that principle. Recognizing individuals as the experts on their own experiences. Like David Martinez at Deloitte, hired through their neurodiversity program. He didn't just work there. He actively helped redesign their hiring and onboarding based on his and others' lived experiences.
Make sense. What second?
Focus on outcomes. Shift the evaluation from subjective things like, does this person fit our culture? Or are they good at office politics? To the actual results they deliver. What impact do they have? What are their strengths producing?
This allows for more flexibility in how the work gets done.
Huge flexibility. As long as the desired outcome is achieved, the how can vary. Think about the Infinite Flow Dance Company example.
Right, the dance company with disabled and non-disabled dancers.
Their outcome is powerful, emotionally resonant dance. By focusing only on that outcome, they can hire incredibly talented dancers who happen to use wheelchairs or are deaf talent that companies obsessed with a narrow traditional process of being a dancer would completely overlook. Focusing on the what opens up the who.
Okay, third principle.
Flexibility. This means moving beyond accommodations as just occasional exceptions for specific individuals. Instead, build flexibility into the system as a core feature, the default way of operating.
Why is that better than individual accommodations?
Well, accommodations often require disclosure, which carries risks. There can be stigma, sometimes documentation hurdles. It can even create envy or resentment if it's seen as special treatment. Making flexibility the norm avoids a lot of that.
Flexibility in schedule, location, maybe even job tasks.
All of the above. Things like job co-design, where roles can be shaped around strengths and needs. The book mentions Legalite, that Australian law firm. Their work-by-design approach made flexibility standard, benefiting everyone, people with disabilities, parents, caregivers, anyone needing a different structure. And it boosted satisfaction and innovation.
Fourth principle.
Organizational justice. This is fundamental, ensuring fairness across the board, hiring, pay, promotions, performance reviews, everything. A foundation of perceived fairness builds trust and strengthens the entire culture.
The book breaks justice down, right? Different types.
Yeah. Distributive justice, fair outcomes; procedural justice, fair processes; interpersonal justice, respectful treatment; informational justice, clear communication; and contributive justice, feeling seen, able to contribute. It even suggests frameworks like Levinthal's criteria for just procedures as a kind of checklist.
And the Call Yockle example.
Right, the Israeli call center, designed explicitly around justice principles to support workers, often excluded people with disabilities, seniors, shy individuals, ex-convicts. And by prioritizing fairness, they became a high-performing, successful organization.
Fifth principle.
Transparency. Clear, open communication, avoiding hidden rules, insider jargon, secret handshakes for getting ahead. Transparency builds psychological safety and trust. It makes processes accessible and understandable for everyone.
Like Ultranauts.
Yeah.
The company with a majority neurodivergent workforce.
Exactly. They're built on transparency. They actively involve employees in designing things like promotion criteria. That openness clarifies expectations and reduces anxiety for everyone.
And the last one, implicit. Maybe.
Yes, the implicit principle of using valid tools and measurement. Basically, ensuring that the methods used for hiring, performance evaluation, promotions are objective, accurate, and actually measure what's relevant for the job.
Reduces bias. Focuses on real skills.
Precisely. It ensures talent isn't overlooked simply because someone doesn't fit a subjective, perhaps biased mold. It reinforces fairness.
Okay, so those 6 principles: participation, outcomes focus, flexibility, organizational justice, transparency, and valid measurement, when you apply them systemically.
Right, across the whole organization. You start to create an environment that doesn't just remove barriers, but actively supports all employees in bringing their best work.
It's that Canary Code, in action designing for the most sensitive, ends up creating a healthier, stronger, more innovative place for everyone. The psychological curb cut effect, but scaled up.
You got it. That's the core message.
And that really is the powerful argument of the Canary Code.
Yeah.
We've explored that central metaphor, understood why we need to look beyond just basic inclusion toward holistic, embodied belonging.
And learned about these concrete principles: participation, outcomes, flexibility, justice, transparency, validity, that can actually guide organizations in building radically inclusive systems.
And these aren't just, abstract ideas from a book. They offer really practical insights for you listening right now, a lens to look at your own workplace.
Yeah, a way to identify maybe where the system itself is creating friction and understand how you might advocate for or even help implement changes that benefit not just a few, but really everyone.
So we really want to invite you to carry this thinking forward. Think about the canaries you might know in your work, in your community. What are their struggles telling you about the systems they're operating in?
How might genuinely listening, genuinely supporting them actually reveal ways to make that space better for everybody involved?
And maybe consider this final thought. Could the talent your organization is missing out on, or the problems it just can't seem to solve, could that be linked to the voices you're not hearing, the fundamental needs you're not meeting?
What does it even mean for someone to be considered unincludable? And maybe, just maybe, what's one small step you could take starting tomorrow to change that reality for someone?
Lots to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Canary Code.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. Until next time.
Thanks for listening. Visit our library and subscribe below for more book summaries. This has been a Sprint Reads production.